It's a long time since autumn of 1874. The years have a way of blurring, like smoke in a strong wind. But some things burn themselves into the memory. They leave a scar on the spirit, a mark that time can't smooth away. My hands, they shake now. My back, it won't straighten, not like it used to. But the mind, it still sees it clear as yesterday. Silver Creek Pass, the Colorado Rockies, a place of granite and pine, of thin air and colder shadows. A place we thought held our fortune. It held something else entirely, something ancient, something watchful. We were 5 men, really. 6, if you counted the one who broke. But for a time, that was all there was. A camp, a promising vein of quartz. The sky was clear. The creek ran fast. Then the silence started. I was younger then, in my late 30s, wiry, strong. My face etched with the sun and wind, my hands calloused from years of wood and rock. I'd worked the Michigan forests, dug for gold in California. I knew the bite of a pickaxe. I knew the promise of the earth, and I knew when a place felt right. Silver Creek Pass, that autumn, felt right. The aspens had just finished their show, a last blaze of gold, before the stark skeletal branches took over. The air was crisp, clean, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. A good place to dig, a good place to make a life. Silas Thorne, he was our leader. Mid-50s, broad-shouldered, lean, a neatly trimmed graying beard, eyes the color of cold river stones that missed nothing. He wore a heavy wool jacket even then, in the mild days, and carried himself with a quiet confidence that settled a man's nerves. Silas had been a foreman, guided expeditions. He spoke in short, deliberate sentences. A man of facts. He'd seen more mountain mischief than most, and he wasn't easily spooked. He was the anchor. Then there was Elias Blackwood. Eli, tall and gaunt, early 40s, long, dark hair, often braided. Eyes that seemed ancient, distant, like he'd seen things the rest of us hadn't even imagined. Eli was a trapper, a guide, had lived among the indigenous peoples for years, learned their ways, their stories. He moved with the quiet grace of a shadow, rarely spoke unless it mattered. Eli was the one who listened to the mountain, not just to the wind or the creek, but to the silence itself. He'd be the first to sense the wrongness. Caleb Finch, Cal, was the young one, barely 20, fresh-faced, from a Kansas farm, his hands still soft, not yet hardened by the mountains. Tall and gangly, with eager, wide eyes and a perpetually hopeful expression. He'd come west to make his fortune, send money back to his widowed mother. He looked up to Silas and me, full of questions. He was our innocence. Jedediah Stone, Jed, was in his late 20s, stocky, close-cropped beard, a permanent scowl it seemed. He was a hard worker, no doubt, but quick-tempered, prone to impatience. He'd complain, he'd blame, he'd lash out. Fiercely pragmatic, he scoffed at Eli's quiet observations. He was the one who'd later shout at shadows. And then there was Dutch Vanderhoek, burly, early 30s, a thick, blonde mustache, a booming laugh that echoed off the canyon walls. Dutch believed only what he could see, touch, or hit with a shovel. A former teamster, strong as an ox, he was the embodiment of stubborn practicality. He'd dismiss any oddity as animal mischief or rival prospectors. Dutch was a rock of skepticism. We'd made good time getting into the pass, cutting through the timber line, following the Silver Creek up. The last light of September was fading fast, but we still had weeks, maybe a month, before the heavy snows started. Enough time, we thought, to sink a decent shaft, prove our claim, and maybe even pull out some color. The first days were good. Hard work, but good. The rhythm of it, the ring of a pickaxe against rock, the scrape of a shovel, the smell of fresh-cut pine from our cabin logs. We chose a spot on a flat bench above the creek, protected by a stand of thick lodgepole pines. We built our lean-to, a rough cabin, a fire pit that would throw heat for hours. We worked like hell, all of us. Silas, directing the digging, his eyes sharp for the telltale signs in the rock. Dutch and Jed, swinging picks with a vengeance, their muscles knotting. Cal, still learning the rhythm, but eager, always eager. Eli, ranging out, checking the trap lines he'd set, bringing back a rabbit or two to supplement our stores. And me, I just worked. It felt right. The promise was there. Around the campfire, the camaraderie was easy. Stories of other claims, other towns, other hard luck. The roar of the creek was a constant companion, a white noise against the vast silence of the mountains. The stars, they hung so close you felt you could reach out and pluck them from the inky blackness. This was the wild, all right. Untamed. But we were men who knew how to tame a slice of it, at least for a while. The first oddities, they were small, easily rationalized. A misplaced axe. We'd blame Cal, naturally, the new hand. He'd swear he left it by the woodpile. But it would turn up later, leaning against the cabin wall, not where anyone remembered putting it. A pickaxe, gone from the side of the shaft, found 20 yards away, half buried in a drift of pine needles. Forgetful lot, we are, Silas would grumble, though his brow would furrow just a little. We chalked it up to exhaustion, the thin mountain air playing tricks, or simply the chaos of setting up a new camp. It happened. Then, more unsettling things. Our stores. We kept them in canvas bags, lashed tight, suspended from a sturdy limb, to keep them safe from bears or hungry martens. Dried meat, hardtack, our coffee beans. Not much, just a handful of rations. But it was enough to notice a bag of jerky, half empty when we were certain it had been full. A sack of hardtack, gnawed open, with only crumbs left inside. Not a neat job, but not the frantic tearing of a desperate animal either. No claw marks, no teeth marks we could make sense of. Bear got a taste for cured beef now? Jed scoffed, but he kept his rifle closer at night. Dutch blamed squirrels, then rival prospectors. Someone's trying to scare us off, Silas, he'd bellow, his voice echoing. Trying to jump our claim, but there were no other camps we knew of, not for miles. And no human would be so clumsy, so random. If someone wanted to scare us off, they'd do it with a warning shot, not by stealing a few ounces of dried venison. Eli, he said little, just watched. His eyes would track the shadows in the pines. He'd spend longer out on his trap lines, returning with nothing but a quiet shake of his head. Birds are quiet, he murmured one evening, stirring the embers of the fire with a stick. Too quiet for this time of year. We looked up. He was right. The usual chatter of jays, the distant hoot of an owl, even the scurry of small creatures in the undergrowth. It had all faded. A profound quiet had settled over the pass, a silence that swallowed sound. We dismissed it. The cold, maybe, approaching winter. But even Cal, who was usually quick to laugh, looked a little uneasy then. Then came the soap. All of it. We kept it in a heavy canvas sack, tucked into a sturdy crate by the cabin entrance. 3 bars of lye soap. Precious stuff out here. For washing clothes, for hands, for sanity. One morning, Dutch went to fetch it. He came back, face pale, the empty sack dangling from his hand. "It's gone," he said, his booming voice strangely muted. "All of it. Every last bar." We checked the crate. No sign of a struggle. No forced entry. Just gone. Not a single wrapper. Not a crumb. Jed kicked at the dirt. "Damn varmints," he muttered, more to himself than us. They got a taste for lye now? It made no sense. Food, yes. Animals were hungry. But soap? What animal would steal soap? And not just a piece, but the whole stash, carefully packed. It was too deliberate. Too strange. It pulled the rug out from under our easy explanations. It was the first time I felt a true shiver of unease that had nothing to do with the biting cold. Silas walked a slow circle around the cabin, his gaze sharp. He checked the ground for tracks. Nothing. No claw marks, no boot prints, just the usual scuffs of our own boots in the pine needles. He looked up at the surrounding trees, his eyes narrowing. He still said nothing, but his jaw was tight. That night, the fire felt smaller. The creek's murmur seemed to carry a different note, a kind of hushed warning. We kept our rifles close, loaded. We slept fitfully, listening. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of the wind through the pines, it made us jump. A faint, musky scent began to drift through the camp at dusk. It wasn't the sweet smell of pine, or the acrid tang of wood smoke, or the familiar scent of damp earth. It was wild. Animal, yes, but not like any animal I knew. Not bear, not wolf. Something else, something ancient. It hung heavy in the cold air, a primal, unsettling odor. And then, just before the moon dipped below the jagged peaks, as the last embers of our fire cast long, dancing shadows, Cal saw it, or thought he saw it. He didn't shout. Just a sharp intake of breath, a hand pointing with a trembling finger towards the edge of the tree line, where the dense lodgepole pines stood like sentinels. A shadow, darker than the night itself, indistinct, massive, standing motionless amongst the trees, watching our camp. Tall, too tall. It was just there. Then it was not. Gone. No sound. No snapped twig. Just the cold silence. We were no longer alone. We knew it. We could feel it. A gnawing feeling deep in the gut. The wilderness had always been a silent partner in our endeavors. Now, it felt like an enemy, an intelligent one, and it was watching. We were no longer alone. We knew it. We could feel it. A gnawing feeling deep in the gut. The wilderness had always been a silent partner in our endeavors. Now, it felt like an enemy, an intelligent one, and it was watching. The next few days, that feeling solidified into a hard, cold fact. The missing supplies continued, but now, it wasn't just food. It was specific. Our best digging shovel. Gone one morning, only to reappear 3 days later, leaning against a different tree, 20 yards from where it should have been. The head of a splitting maul. Just the head. The handle still propped by the fire pit. It made no sense. This strange, precise mischief. It wasn't hungry animals. It wasn't rival prospectors. It was something else. Something deliberate. Something that knew what we needed and what would unsettle us most. The air grew colder. The aspens had long since dropped their golden leaves, leaving the skeletal branches to scratch at the bruised sky. The days shortened, the light growing weaker, making the shadows longer, deeper, and the silence. Eli was right. The birds had all but vanished. The usual forest sounds, the rustle of squirrels, the distant call of a hawk, were gone. It was like the mountains themselves were holding their breath, a profound, unnatural quiet. Then came the footprints. We found them first by the creek, where the ground was softest. Silas was checking the sluice box, making sure the runoff was clear. He froze. We heard him let out a low whistle, a sound that cut through the silence like a knife. We walked over. There, pressed deep into the damp earth, were tracks. Not bear, not wolf. These were human-like, but impossible. Nearly 18 inches long, a broad, flat shape, with clearly defined toes. We crouched down, our breath pluming in the cold air. "What in God's name?" Jed breathed, his voice rough. Even Dutch, who usually had a ready explanation for everything, was silent. Silas ran his calloused hand over the print carefully. He stood up, slowly, his eyes scanning the creek bank, then the surrounding trees. "That ain't no bear," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And it ain't no man." Eli, who had been standing a little apart, just nodded. His face was grim. "Old spirits," he murmured, so low I barely heard it. "They don't like being disturbed." We found more. Circling our claim, just at the edge of the diggings, leading up to the cabin, then veering off into the thickest part of the lodgepole pines. Always just at the fringe, never quite entering our immediate camp, but always there, a silent declaration. They were too massive, too distinct, for any rational explanation. Our attempts to rationalize them away became strained. We argued. Jed, his temper always quick, snapped at Cal for imaginary slights. Dutch still clung to the idea of rival prospectors, but his booming voice lacked its usual conviction, his eyes darting to the tree line more often than not. He even started carrying his rifle with him to the creek, something he'd never done before. "Someone's playing games," Jed yelled one evening, kicking at the fire, sending sparks showering into the darkness. "Trying to drive us out. We should lay a trap. Ambush them." Silas just shook his head. "Ambush what, Jed? Smoke? You seen anything to shoot at yet?" "I seen enough," Jed retorted, pointing vaguely into the darkness. "I seen shadows. I heard things." We all had. The musky scent was stronger now, often clinging to the air around our camp at dusk. And the sounds. A low, rhythmic times thump asterisk, like something heavy shifting in the undergrowth, just beyond the reach of our sight. Sometimes, a high-pitched moan, not animal, not human, but something in between, that made the hairs on your arms stand on end. Eli called them calls. We didn't know what to call them. We just knew they were wrong. The glimpses became more frequent and clearer. These were no longer fleeting shadows. They were sustained observations. Massive, hair-covered figures, 8, maybe 9 feet tall, standing motionless among the lodgepole pines, watching our camp, sometimes just 50 yards out, sometimes 100. I saw one myself. I remember it clearly. The light was fading fast, the sun a mere memory behind the western peaks. I was coming back from hauling water from the creek, my bucket heavy, my mind on supper. I stopped. My breath hitched. There it stood, just beyond the firelight's reach, partially obscured by the thick trunk of a pine. A colossal shape, covered in reddish-brown hair, shaggy and thick. Its arms hung low, massive, but its posture was undeniably upright. Its head was sunk between broad shoulders, but I could feel its gaze, a weight, a presence. I didn't move. Couldn't. My hands went numb around the bucket handle. My blood ran cold. It didn't move either, just stood there, utterly still, a silent sentinel. I wanted to yell, to run, to drop the bucket and grab my rifle. But some primal part of me knew that any sudden movement would be a mistake. Then, Silas appeared from the cabin, his Henry rifle already in his hands. He'd sensed it. He saw where my eyes were fixed. He raised the rifle slowly, steadily, bringing it to his shoulder. The creature was there. Then it was not. It didn't run. It didn't crash through the undergrowth. It simply vanished, like smoke. One moment, a colossal, terrifying presence. The next, empty space between the pines. The silence that followed was heavier than before, suffocating. Silas lowered his rifle, his jaw tight. He hadn't fired. He couldn't have. There was nothing to shoot at, just the vast, indifferent forest. This happened again and again. Cal swore he saw two, once standing side by side. Jed, in a fit of terror and frustration, fired off 3 rounds into the darkness one night, wasting precious ammunition. He swore he heard a grunt, a heavy thud, but when we checked the next morning, there was nothing. No blood, no tracks, just the endless pines. Our sleep became a fractured thing, filled with nightmares. The cold seeped into our bones, but the chill that truly gnawed at us was the one that came from within, from knowing we were watched, that we were being toyed with. I found myself taking long, silent walks to the creek at dawn. The air was crisp then, the first light painting the peaks in soft, ethereal hues. It was a time of peace, or what passed for it, a moment to clear the head before the day's work began, before the fear crept back in. One morning, the air was still, a thin mist rising from the creek. I was alone, just me and the quiet. I knelt by the water, splashing my face with the icy liquid, trying to shake off the lingering unease of the night. When I looked up, it was there, standing on the opposite bank, perhaps 30 yards away, taller than I remembered, even from the previous sightings. A massive, hair-covered figure, bathed in the soft, first light of morning. Its reddish-brown hair, thick and shaggy, seemed to absorb the weak sunlight. Its heavy brow obscured much of its face, but I could make out its features now. A broad nose, a wide, almost downturned mouth, and its eyes. I locked eyes with it. They were not the eyes of an animal. Not wild, not feral. They were deep-set, dark, and held an intelligence that was profound. A sorrow, too. A weary, ancient wisdom. There was no aggression there, no malice, just a quiet, unsettling understanding. It wasn't looking times at times me. It was looking times into times me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat in the profound silence. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. Then it did something that shattered everything I thought I knew. Slowly, deliberately, it shook its massive head, a gentle, almost human gesture, a silent, wordless communication, a warning, perhaps, a profound, sorrowful message that hung heavy in the cold mountain air between us. Then it turned. Not with a sudden jerk, not with a panicked flight. It simply turned, its impossibly long strides carrying it with a quiet grace. It walked upright, not running, not even hurrying, into the dense, dark maw of the lodgepole pines. And then it was gone, vanished into the impenetrable forest, leaving only the mist and the rising sun. I stood there for a long time, the icy creek water dripping from my face, my entire body trembling. The cold was secondary. What I had seen, what I had felt in those eyes, the sheer intelligence behind that simple gesture, it tore through every rational explanation we had clung to. This was no beast. This was no man in a costume. This was something else, something older, something that understood, and it had delivered its message. Our pretense of safety, our illusion of control, it was all shattered. We were not just being bothered, we were being watched, we were being judged, and we were trespassing. The message hung in the air long after the creature had vanished, a cold weight pressing down on the pass. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration. We were not just being bothered, we were being judged, and we were trespassing. That simple shake of the head, that profound sorrow in its eyes, had spoken volumes. It said, asterisk, you do not belong here. You have been warned. Asterisk. The days that followed were a testament to that warning. The shift was immediate. The creatures were no longer content with mere observation. Their presence intensified, became more aggressive, more deliberate. It was as if my encounter at the creek had been a final, patient appeal, and with its dismissal, a new phase of the siege began. The sounds, those wrong calls Eli had spoken of, grew louder, closer, more frequent. They were no longer distant moans or rhythmic thumps. They were complex, a series of deep, guttural notes, followed by a high-pitched, almost whistling sound that seemed to slice through the thin mountain air. Then, a low, resonating hum that vibrated in your teeth. Sometimes they came from the ridge directly above our camp, sometimes from the sheer rock face across the creek. They echoed, distorted, from all directions, seeming to envelop us, to press in. It wasn't just noise. It felt like speech, like a conversation we weren't meant to understand, yet whose intent was clear. They were talking about us. They were planning. Sleep became impossible. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of the wind through the pines became a potential threat. We huddled closer to the fire, but its warmth offered no comfort against the chill that had settled deep in our bones. We took turns on watch, but what was there to watch for? A shadow that vanished? A sound that defied origin? The exhaustion was a heavy cloak, dulling our senses, fraying our nerves. Our routines, once so solid and reassuring, crumbled. We couldn't safely range far from camp for firewood. The creek, once a source of peace, became a gauntlet. Every trip for water was a dash, eyes darting, heart pounding. The feeling was absolute. We were trapped. Our escape routes, the very trails we had come in on, now felt like open avenues for attack, watched from every ridge. The mountains, once a promise, were now a prison. Supplies dwindled, not just from the creatures' persistent thefts, though those continued. Now, with an almost taunting selectivity, a loaf of freshly baked bread gone from a cooler box, a small pouch of tobacco lifted from Jed's coat pocket while he slept, but from our inability to gather more. Our traps lay empty, neglected. The thought of venturing deep enough into the woods to hunt for game was unthinkable. The pickaxes lay idle for longer stretches. The gold, the very reason we were there, began to feel like a foolish dream, a lure that had led us into a nightmare. Jedediah Stone, the man who had scoffed at Eli's superstitions, was the first to truly break. His skepticism curdled into a volatile paranoia. He stopped shaving, his close-cropped beard growing wild and unkempt. His eyes, once quick and angry, now held a frantic, desperate glint. He paced the camp incessantly, muttering to himself, kicking at stray rocks, his hand never far from the butt of his pistol. "They're watching, I tell you." He'd suddenly shout, pointing an accusatory finger into the empty darkness beyond the firelight. "Right there! I see 'em! Those damn hairy giants!" He started wasting ammunition again, firing his rifle at shadows, at sounds that were nothing more than wind. One night, a branch cracked loudly from the weight of snow higher up on the slope. Jed reacted instantly, pumping 3 rounds into the black. The shots echoed, deafening, then were swallowed by the sudden, profound silence that followed. Silas, ever the leader, tried to calm him. "Jed, you're going to empty your magazine for a squirrel," Silas said, his voice strained, tired. He was trying to keep his authority, but his own face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed. Jed whirled on him, his pistol still smoking. "A squirrel, you say? A damn squirrel that moves like a ghost and steals our soap? You still think it's a squirrel, Silas? You're a fool! They're coming for us. They're going to tear us apart." His finger was on the trigger, the barrel of the pistol wavering in Silas's direction. For a tense moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Thomas and Dutch moved instinctively, ready to intervene. Cal whimpered, shrinking back against a stack of crates. "Put the gun down, Jed," Eli said, his voice a low, steady rumble, cutting through the tension. Eli had been observing Jed's unraveling, with a quiet, mournful understanding. "You'll regret it." Jed hesitated, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The wildness in his eyes battled with a flicker of recognition. Slowly, with a shuddering sigh, he lowered the pistol. But the moment had been a stark illustration of how close we were to tearing ourselves apart. The creatures didn't need to attack us directly. They were simply letting us do their work for them. Dutch Vanderhoek, the burly, booming skeptic, was a ghost of his former self. His loud laugh was gone, replaced by a hollow silence. He barely spoke, his thick blonde mustache now matted, his usually ruddy face pale and drawn. His eyes, once full of stubborn practicality, were now haunted, always scanning the tree line, always searching for the impossible. He still moved with the strength of an ox, but it was a strength devoid of spirit. He worked mechanically, chopping wood by the fire, mending torn canvas, but his gaze was distant, his thoughts miles away. Lost in the chilling certainty of what watched us, he had seen too much. He had felt the cold breath of the impossible. Even his hardened resolve had been chipped away, piece by agonizing piece. Eli, meanwhile, retreated further into himself, his ancient eyes observing everything. He would often sit by the fire, carving a small wooden figure, his movements slow and deliberate. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words carried a heavy weight. "These are the old ones," he murmured one evening, staring into the flickering flames, not looking at any of us. "The ones who walked here before the mountains were named. They are the guardians, the keepers of the land. We have trespassed, and they are reclaiming what is theirs." Jed scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. Spirits? You still talking about spirits, Eli? I'm talking about something that breathes and walks and probably eats. Eli merely shook his head, a gesture that mirrored the creature's own. They are both, Jed. They are of the earth, and they are its spirit. They do not want our gold. They want us gone, and they will have it. His words, rather than offering comfort or explanation, only deepened the dread. Eli wasn't afraid times them, not in the same way we were. He was afraid times for times us. He understood the profound ancient power we were up against. He seemed to know what was coming. The creatures weren't just disrupting our sleep and our morale. They were actively interfering with our work. One morning, we found our best digging tools, our picks and shovels, not stolen, but meticulously bent. Their handles snapped clean in half, as if by immense, controlled force. Not scattered in a fit of rage, but laid out, almost neatly, a clear message. Another day, the small, rickety sluice box we'd built by the creek was found overturned, its carefully placed riffles torn out, the wooden planks splintered. Our attempts to repair them were met with further sabotage the following night. It was precise, intelligent destruction designed to cripple our efforts without direct confrontation. A war of attrition, fought in the shadows, against an enemy that seemed to know our every move. Cal, the young one, grew paler by the day. His eager, wide eyes now held a perpetual terror. He stopped asking questions. He just watched, his movements jerky, his breath often catching in his throat. He would jump at the slightest sound, his hand reaching for the knife at his belt. He dreamt aloud sometimes, waking the camp with choked cries, describing vast, silent figures standing over him in the darkness. We tried to comfort him, to reassure him, but our words rang hollow. We were as scared as he was. The cold deepened. The aspens had long since shed their gold, leaving the pass stark and skeletal. The days grew shorter, the light weaker, and the shadows stretched long and menacing from the lodgepole pines. We stopped trying to dig. We stopped trying to repair. We simply existed, huddled together, rationing our dwindling food, our eyes constantly on the edges of the forest. Our camp, our small haven in the vast wilderness, had become a cage, a prison, watched by silent, ancient wardens. We were utterly outmatched. The realization settled over us like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. There was no fighting them, no reasoning, no escape, it seemed. They were patient, they were intelligent, and they were relentless. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste a metallic tang of fear and despair. Every man knew it. Every man felt the pressure building towards a breaking point that was no longer a question of times if asterisk, but times when asterisk. The mountains held their breath, and so did we. We waited for whatever came next,